In the winter of 1820, the Appalachia ridges rose like dark, watching giants over 13-year-old. He'd slept in their shadow since the fire took his family, learning to live off roots, creek water, and the kindness of no one. Folks in the holler spoke his name in whispers. That homeless boy who should have died with the rest of them. But when he overheard a drunken trapper bragging about the blaze he'd lit to settle a score, something colder than the mountain wind settled in the boy's chest. The wilderness had carved him thin and hard, and now it gave him purpose, to hunt a man who believed himself beyond consequences. In those mountains, justice was slow, but revenge had a way of finding its own path. Ezra woke to the smell of cornmeal mush and bacon, luxuries he'd almost forgotten existed. For a moment, still caught between sleep and waking, he thought he was home, that his mother was cooking breakfast and his father would be coming in from checking the animals. Then reality crashed back, and the familiar weight settled on his chest. The knowledge that they were gone, that he was alone, that everything had changed. Except he wasn't alone. Not entirely. Not anymore. He climbed down from the loft to find Sarah already up, cleaning her rifle with practiced efficiency. She glanced at him, nodded once, then went back to her work. Jedediah stood at the hearth, stirring a pot. "Sleep well?" the old man asked. "Better than I have in a while," Ezra admitted. "Good. You'll need your strength." Jedediah ladled food onto tin plates. "Sarah and I were talking. If the Blackwoods are planning to move against us, they'll likely start with small things. Testing our defenses, seeing how we react. We need to be ready." They ate in comfortable silence. Then Jedediah pushed back from the table and fixed Ezra with those prophet's eyes. "Tell me, boy, what do you know about fighting? I can shoot a rifle, set snares, use a knife for hunting." "That's not what I asked." Jedediah's voice was patient but firm. "Hunting's one thing. Fighting men who want to kill you is another. You ever been in a real fight?" Ezra thought about lying, but there was something in the old man's gaze that demanded truth. "No, sir, I haven't." "Figured as much. You've got the look of someone who's been running on anger and not much else." Jedediah stood, gestured for Ezra to follow. "Come on. Time to start your education." They went outside to a clearing behind the cabin. Sarah was already there, stretching, moving through what looked like fighting stances. She saw Ezra's surprise and grinned. "Pa fought in the war," she said. 1812, killed his share of British regulars and Creek warriors. He's been teaching me since I was old enough to hold a stick." "The world's a hard place," Jedediah said, picking up two stout branches from a pile at the edge of the clearing. He tossed one to Ezra. "Especially for those of us who live outside the law's protection. So we learn to protect ourselves." He hefted his own branch. "Now show me what you'd do if I came at you." Ezra gripped the branch, tried to remember how his father had held his rifle when a bear had threatened them once. He took a stance, raised the branch. Jedediah moved. One moment he was standing still. The next, his branch had swept Ezra's legs out from under him. Ezra hit the ground hard, all the air knocked from his lungs. "Too slow," Jedediah said mildly. "Too much thinking, not enough doing. Get up." Ezra got up. Jedediah came at him again, and again Ezra ended up on his back, this time with the old man's branch at his throat. "You're tensing up before you move," Sarah called out. "Telegraphing everything you're about to do. A fighter can read that easy as words on a page. They drilled for hours. Jedediah showed Ezra basic stances, how to keep his weight balanced, how to move without thinking about it, how to take a hit and keep moving, how to use an opponent's momentum against them. Sarah joined in, demonstrating techniques, and Ezra discovered she was far better than he was, faster, more fluid, hitting hard despite being smaller. By midday, Ezra was covered in bruises and breathing hard, but something was starting to click, his body beginning to understand what his mind couldn't quite grasp. "That's enough for today," Jedediah finally said. "You did good. Most folks quit after the first hour." "I don't quit," Ezra said quietly. Something passed between the old man and the boy, an understanding. Jedediah nodded slowly. "No, I reckon you don't." They spent the afternoon working around the property. Jedediah showed Ezra how he'd set up his defenses, carefully placed obstacles that would funnel attackers into kill zones, hidden positions that gave good lines of sight, escape routes that only someone who knew the terrain could follow. It was like nothing Ezra had seen before. Military thinking applied to mountain living. "You learn all this in the war?" Ezra asked. "Some of it. The rest I learned from the Cherokee, before they were pushed west." Jedediah's face darkened. "Good people, fought alongside some of them, learned from them. What happened to them?" He shook his head. "Point is, son, there's two kinds of fighting. There's the kind where you stand up in lines and shoot at each other like gentlemen. And then there's the kind where you use every advantage you have. Fight dirty. Do whatever it takes to survive. The Blackwoods fight the second way, even if they dress it up in fine words about law and property. So if you're gonna go against them, you need to learn to fight their way, only better." That night, after supper, Sarah showed Ezra her maps. She'd drawn them herself, carefully detailing every trail and hollow and ridge within 20 miles. She knew the country like Ezra knew his own former territory, but her knowledge was deeper, more strategic. "There," she said, pointing to a narrow pass between two ridges. "That's where they'll have to come through if they're bringing wagons. We can see them coming from a mile away." Her finger traced another route. "And this is where they might try to sneak someone in on foot, thinking they're clever. But there's a sinkhole there, hidden by brush. Pa covered it with branches that'll hold a deer, but not a man. Anyone who doesn't know exactly where to step goes straight through." "You're planning for a siege," Ezra said, impressed despite himself. "We're planning to not be caught unprepared," Sarah corrected. "Pa says hope for peace, but prepare for war. The Blackwoods want this land. They're going to have to work for it." Over the following days, Ezra fell into a routine. Mornings were for combat training, Jedediah drilling him relentlessly, while Sarah watched and offered commentary. Afternoons were for work, hunting, gathering, maintaining the defenses, learning the land. Evenings were for planning and education. Jedediah, it turned out, could read and write, and he insisted Ezra continue his education. "Your ma taught you letters, didn't she?" "Yes, sir. Some arithmetic too." "Good. Ignorance is a weapon your enemies will use against you. They'll wave papers in your face, use fancy words, make you feel small. But if you can read what they're reading, understand what they're saying, you can fight them on even ground." So Ezra read from Jedediah's small collection of books, The Bible, of course, but also histories, philosophy, even a battered copy of Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England. He learned about property rights and contracts, about the legal frameworks the Blackwoods used to justify their theft. Knowledge, he realized, was another kind of weapon. Sarah taught him other skills: how to move silent through the woods, how to track and be tracked, how to read weather signs, where to find water in drought, which plants could heal and which could kill. She was a harsh teacher, quick to point out mistakes, but fair. When Ezra did something right, she acknowledged it. "You're getting better," she said one afternoon after he'd managed to sneak up within 10 feet of her without being detected. "Still sound like a drunk bear compared to me, but better." "High praise," Ezra said dryly, and was rewarded with one of her rare smiles. They were becoming something like friends, he realized, or maybe comrades was a better word, people bound together by necessity and shared enemies. 3 weeks after Ezra's arrival, the first probe came. Sarah spotted them from her lookout position on the ridge, 2 men on horseback, riding slowly up the trail toward the Hart place. She gave the bird call signal that meant strangers approaching, and by the time the riders came into view of the cabin, all 3 of them were in position. Ezra crouched in a blind Jedediah had built into a tangle of deadfall, his spear ready. From here, he could see the cabin's front approach, but remain invisible. Sarah was somewhere up in the trees. He'd seen her climb, but lost track of her after that. Jedediah stood on the cabin's porch, rifle cradled in his arms, looking for all the world like a man enjoying the afternoon sun. The riders came to a stop at the edge of the clearing. One of them Ezra recognized. A man named Cutter, who worked for the Blackwoods, handled their rougher business. The other was a stranger, younger, with a mean twist to his mouth. "Jedediah Hart," Cutter called out, friendly enough on the surface. "Been a while. Thought I'd ride up, see how you're getting on." "Getting on fine," Jedediah replied, not moving from his spot. "Don't recall inviting visitors." "Now, that's not very neighborly." Cutter walked his horse a few steps closer. "Mr. Blackwood sent me with a message. He's interested in purchasing your property, willing to pay fair price, too. More than fair, considering how remote it is up here." "Not interested in selling." "You haven't heard the price yet." "Don't need to. This is my land, and I'm staying on it." Cutter's friendly expression didn't change, but something cold moved behind his eyes. "Mr. Blackwood's used to getting what he wants, Jedediah. It'd be easier on everyone if you just took the offer." "I imagine it would, but I'm not interested in making things easy for Silas Blackwood." The younger man spoke up then, his voice carrying a sneer. "You're being stubborn, old man, out here all alone with just your daughter for company. Accidents happen in these mountains. Be a shame if something happened to either of you." The threat hung in the air, naked and ugly. Ezra felt his hand tighten on his spear, every muscle tensing. But Jedediah just smiled, a cold, terrible smile that reminded Ezra the old man had killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. "I'm not alone," Jedediah said quietly, "and I don't take kindly to threats against my daughter. So here's how this is going to go. You're going to turn those horses around and ride back to Silas Blackwood. You're going to tell him I said no, and if he sends anyone else up here making threats, they won't ride back. We clear?" Cutter's face hardened. "You're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be my first." Jedediah shifted slightly, and the rifle moved with him, still casual but suddenly more present. Now get! For a moment, Ezra thought they might try something. The younger man's hand drifted toward his belt, where a pistol was tucked. But then a rock bounced off his horse's rump. Not thrown hard, but enough to startle the animal. The rider fought for control, cursing, and when he looked up, Sarah was visible in a tree branch, her rifle aimed steady at his chest. "My daughter," Jedediah said mildly. "Like I said, not alone." Cutter assessed the situation. An old man who clearly knew how to use his weapon, a girl with the high ground and a rifle, and probably others hidden in the woods if he was smart enough to consider it. The math didn't work in his favor. "This isn't over," he said, turning his horse. "It is for today," Jedediah replied. They rode off, the younger man throwing angry glances back over his shoulder. Ezra stayed frozen in his hiding spot until Sarah gave the all-clear signal, then emerged slowly. "That's it," he said, disappointed despite himself. "They just left?" "That was a probe," Jedediah said, lowering his rifle, testing our resolve, seeing how we'd react. "Now they know we're ready for them, won't be intimidated. So next time, they'll come with more men and a different plan." He looked at Ezra. "This is what fighting the Blackwoods looks like, boy. Not one big battle, but 100 small ones. They push, we push back. They probe, we defend. Eventually one side gives up or makes a fatal mistake." "What if we don't want to wait for them to make the next move?" Sarah had climbed down from her perch. "What if we hit them first?" "Then we become the aggressors," Jedediah said, "and we lose any claim to being in the right." He saw Ezra's expression and shook his head. "I know what you're thinking, son. That righteousness doesn't matter when you're dead, and there's truth to that. But around here, reputation matters. People might be afraid of the Blackwoods, but they also know them for what they are. If we can force them to be the ones who escalate, who attack first, we stand a chance of getting some folks on our side when the real trouble starts." Ezra wanted to argue, but he could see the logic. The Blackwoods had gotten away with murdering his parents because they'd controlled the narrative, made it seem legal and justified. If the Hearts were going to survive, they needed to be smarter than that. That night, Ezra lay awake in the loft, thinking about what Jedediah had said. The old man was teaching him patience, strategy, the long game. But part of Ezra, the part that still saw his father hanging from that tree, wanted immediate action, wanted blood and revenge, and justice served hot and final. "Can't sleep?" Sarah's voice came from below, startling him. "Just thinking." "About killing them? The Blackwoods?" Ezra was silent for a moment. "How'd you know?" "Because I see it in your eyes sometimes. This looked like you're somewhere else, watching them die." She was quiet for a beat. "I get it. What they did to your family. I'd want the same thing. But Pa's right. If you just run at them all angry and wild, you'll die. They're stronger, got more men, more guns, more everything. The only way to beat them is to be smarter, more patient, more willing to play the long game." "How long?" Ezra's voice came out raw. "How long am I supposed to wait?" "Long as it takes." Sarah climbed the ladder to the loft, sat on the edge, looking at him in the darkness. "My ma died when I was 8. Fever took her. But before that, there were men, Blackwood men, who came around bothering her when Pa was away hunting. One of them got rough with her, hit her. Pa found out, and I thought he'd go kill the man right then. But he didn't. He waited, watched. 3 months later, that man had an accident. Fell off his horse crossing a creek, hit his head on a rock, drowned in 2 feet of water. She paused. Funny thing was, his saddle girth looked like it had been cut most of the way through, just enough to hold until the right moment. Ezra stared at her. Your father killed him. My father made sure the man who hurt his wife faced consequences. But he did it smart, did it patient, did it in a way nobody could prove. She met his eyes. That's the education Pa's giving you, Ezra. Not just how to fight, but how to fight smart. How to be a ghost in these mountains. How to strike when they least expect it. How to make them afraid of shadows. I don't want to be a ghost, Ezra said. I want them to see me coming, want them to know why they're dying. That's your anger talking, and anger's useful, but only if you control it instead of letting it control you. She stood to leave, then paused. Besides, you think your parents would want you throwing your life away on revenge that fails? Or would they want you to survive, to win, to make sure what happened to them doesn't happen to anyone else? She climbed back down before he could answer, leaving him alone with thoughts that churned like a storm. The weeks rolled on. Summer deepened, the air growing thick with humidity. Thunderstorms rolled through the mountains, violent and brief. Ezra continued his training, and slowly, incrementally, he improved. He could hold his own against Jedediah now, at least for a few exchanges before the old man's experience and skill won out. He could move through the woods quiet enough that Sarah only spotted him 3 times out of 4. He could shoot accurately out to 100 yards with Jedediah's rifle. But more than physical skills, he was learning to think like a fighter, to assess situations, to spot advantages and weaknesses, to plan 3 moves ahead. Jedediah drilled it into him constantly. You see those men who came to threaten us, the old man would say. What did you notice about them? They were armed, confident, thought they could intimidate you. What else? Ezra would think back, reconstructing the scene in his mind. The young one's horse was fresh, well-fed. His clothes were new. Cutter's mount looked tired, and his coat was worn at the elbows. Good. What does that tell you? The young one's got money, probably family money. Cutter's just a hired hand. Been doing this work long enough that it's worn on him. And therefore Cutter's dangerous because he's experienced, but he's got limits. He won't risk his life for wages. The young one's dangerous because he's got something to prove and doesn't know his own limitations. Jedediah would nod, satisfied. That's how you survive, boy. You watch, you learn, you understand who you're dealing with. Every man's got weaknesses. The trick is finding them before they find yours. One evening in late August, Sarah returned from a scouting trip with news. Blackwoods are hiring men. 8 or 10 new faces around Coalmont, all of them looking like trouble. Jedediah frowned. They're building up for something. Won't be another probe next time. We need more information, Ezra said. We're stuck up here. Can't see what they're planning. You thinking of going back down to Coalmont? Jedediah asked. Risky. They might recognize you. I've changed. Ezra touched his face, feeling the unfamiliar angles of it. He'd lost weight, his cheekbones sharp now, his jaw more defined. His hair was long and wild, and months of living rough had weathered his skin. I don't look much like the boy they let walk away. Sarah studied him critically. He's right. I barely recognize him from the half-dead scarecrow that stumbled up here. Put some different clothes on him, he could pass for a drifter. It's dangerous, Jedediah warned. If they catch you, then they catch me. But we need to know what they're planning. Can't just wait up here for them to make their move. Ezra felt something crystallizing in him, a decision made. This is what you've been training me for, isn't it? To be able to move among enemies without them seeing me for what I am. Jedediah was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. All right, but you go in careful, you watch and listen only, and at a first sign of trouble, you disappear. Understood? Understood. They spent the next day preparing. Sarah altered some of her father's old clothes to fit Ezra better, rough homespun that made him look like any other mountain boy looking for work. Jedediah coached him on how to act, how to talk, how to blend in. You're nobody, the old man said. Just another piece of dirt looking to earn a few coins. People don't really see folks like that, and that's your advantage. You keep your head down, your mouth shut except when spoken to, and your eyes open. What should I look for? Numbers, weapons, timing, how many men they've got, what kind of arms, when they might be planning to move, and anything about their leadership. Are the brothers working together, or is there friction? Are the hired men loyal, or just there for wages? Any weakness we can exploit. Ezra set out the next morning, moving down the mountain trails with the caution Jedediah had drilled into him. It felt strange to be heading back toward Coalmont after so long, strange and frightening and necessary all at once. By afternoon, he'd reached the outskirts of town. He stopped at a creek to wash the worst of the trail dirt off, made himself presentable enough, then walked in like he had every right to be there. Coalmont hadn't changed much. Same buildings, same people going about their business. But there were new faces too. Hard men lounging outside the saloon, watching everyone who passed with the cold assessment of hired killers. Ezra counted 7 just on his walk down the main street. He made his way to the blacksmith's shop, hoping Garrett would be alone. The big man was at his forge, hammering something that glowed orange hot. He looked up as Ezra entered, and his eyes widened slightly. "Help you?" Garrett said carefully, his voice neutral. "Looking for work," Ezra said, keeping his voice flat and country. "Heard there might be jobs going." Garrett glanced toward the door, checking if anyone was nearby, then set down his hammer. "You got a death wish, boy," he said quietly. "Coming back here." "They don't know me now. I'm careful." "Careful or not, you're playing a dangerous game." But Garrett moved to his workbench, made a show of examining some tools. "What do you need?" "Information. What are the Blackwoods planning?" Garrett's jaw tightened. "Nothing good. They've hired a small army, been buying up ammunition and supplies. Word is, they're going after old Jedediah Hart's place, mean to take it by force if he won't sell." "When?" "Soon. Week or 2 at most. They're just waiting on a few more men to arrive." Garrett looked at Ezra directly. "You're with Hart now?" "I am." "Then you tell him to get out while he can. Tell him to take his daughter and run, because what's coming won't leave survivors." "He won't run." "Neither will I." "Then you're both fools." But there was something like admiration in Garrett's voice. "Though I suppose the world needs fools sometimes to stand up when sensible folks won't." He grabbed an old horseshoe from his scrap pile, thrust it at Ezra. Here, look like you're buying something in case anyone asks why you were here." Ezra took it, started to leave, then paused. "The blacksmith's daughter, the one Marcus Blackwood's courting. Does she know what kind of man he is?" Garrett's face darkened. "She's 16 and thinks she's in love. Won't hear a word against him." He turned back to his forge. "Some lessons people got to learn the hard way. Now get out of here before someone notices you." Ezra left, walking slowly through town, keeping his head down but his eyes open. He saw two of the hired men outside the store, arguing about something. Saw Jacob Blackwood ride past on a fine horse, looking pleased with himself. Saw the widow Carson sweeping her porch, and when their eyes met briefly, he thought he saw recognition and something like approval in her gaze. He was about to head back into the mountains when he heard voices from the alley beside the saloon. He paused, listening. "Telling you it'll be easy money." That was Marcus Blackwood's voice. "Hart's just one old man and a girl. We go in with 15 men, he'll fold." "What if he doesn't?" Another voice, one of the hired men probably. "Then we burn him out, same as we did the Thorns. Father wants that land, and he'll pay good bonuses to the men who help secure it." A pause. "The old man can die if he's stupid. The girl, though, Father says bring her alive if possible. A little leverage makes negotiations go smoother." Ezra's hand went to his knife. Everything in him screamed to go into that alley, to strike now, while he had the element of surprise, to put his blade in Marcus Blackwood's throat, and damn the consequences. But Jedediah's voice echoed in his head. "You watch, you learn, you wait for the right moment." This wasn't the right moment. He was alone, surrounded by enemies, in the middle of town. If he struck now, he'd die, and the Harts would still face the attack without warning. So Ezra did the hardest thing he'd ever done. He walked away. He made it to the edge of town before his hands stopped shaking, made it another mile into the mountains before he let himself stop and breathe. The rage was still there, hot and terrible, but he'd controlled it. He'd chosen the smart path over the satisfying one. It felt like a small death, letting Marcus Blackwood live. But it also felt like a kind of growth, a maturing of his purpose from blind vengeance to something more calculated. He made it back to the Hart place by nightfall and told them everything he'd learned. 15 men, Jedediah said thoughtfully. "That's more than I expected. They're not taking any chances." "Can we hold against that many?" Sarah asked. "Straight fight? No. But we're not going to give them a straight fight." The old man's eyes gleamed. "We've got advantages they don't. We know the terrain. We've prepared defenses, and we've got something they don't expect." "What's that?" Ezra asked. "Commitment. Those hired men are there for wages. They'll fight, but they won't die for Silas Blackwood's greed. We, on the other hand, are fighting for our home, our lives, our right to exist. That counts for something." He looked between Sarah and Ezra. "We're going to make this the costliest piece of land Silas Blackwood ever tried to take. We're going to bleed them, hurt them, make them afraid, and maybe, just maybe, we'll make them decide it's not worth it." "And if they don't?" Sarah asked quietly. "Then we make sure they remember this fight for the rest of their lives. Make sure every other family in these mountains knows what it costs to stand up to the Blackwoods." Jedediah's face was grim. "We might not win, but we can make sure we're not forgotten." The next days were spent in frantic preparation. They reinforced the defenses, set up additional traps, cached weapons and supplies at strategic points around the property. Jedediah drew up plans for fighting retreats, escape routes, ways to harry and harass a larger force. Most important thing, he told them, is to survive the first assault. They'll come in confident, expecting easy victory. We need to bloody their nose hard enough that they think twice about pressing forward. Make them afraid of what's waiting in the woods. Sarah practiced with a rifle until she could hit a man-sized target at 200 yards consistently. Ezra drilled with his spear and knife until the movements were automatic, muscle memory that wouldn't fail when fear and adrenaline took over. And at night, lying in his loft, Ezra thought about what was coming. He'd wanted revenge on the Blackwoods, wanted to make them pay for what they'd done. Now he was going to get his chance, but not the way he had imagined. Not a clean, final confrontation, but a messy, desperate fight where survival was the only victory that mattered. He thought about his parents, wondered what they'd think of the path he'd chosen. His mother would be worried, would beg him to run, to save himself. His father, though, his father had been a fighter in his own way, stubborn and proud and unwilling to bend knee to bullies. He'd stood up to the Blackwoods, and it had killed him. But he'd stood up. That was worth something. Ezra touched the knife at his belt, the one his father had given him. Soon, very soon, he'd use it for more than hunting game. And when he did, every cut would be a word in a conversation with the dead, a promise kept, a debt paid. 10 days after Ezra's scouting trip, Sarah spotted them coming. It was early morning, mist still clinging to the hollows when she gave the signal. Ezra scrambled to his position in the deadfall blind while Jedediah took his spot on the cabin porch. Sarah melted into the trees, becoming invisible. They came up the trail in force, exactly 15 men, just as Ezra had reported. Silas Blackwood rode at the front, Marcus beside him. The hired guns fanned out behind them, well-armed and alert. They knew this wouldn't be like the last time. Silas pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the clearing, surveying the cabin and the woods beyond. "Jedediah Hart," he called out, "I've come to make you a final offer. Sell me this land for a fair price and walk away whole. Or refuse, and we'll take it anyway, and you won't walk anywhere again." "Same answer as before," Jedediah called back. "This is my land, and I'm keeping it." "Then you're a fool," Silas gestured to his men. "Burn it, all of it, and if Hart or his daughter resist, kill them." The hired men moved forward, spreading out, torches in hand. This was it, the moment when everything would be decided. Ezra gripped his spear, his heart hammering. The waiting was over. The fight was beginning. And somewhere deep inside, the boy who'd watched his parents die smiled a cold, terrible smile. The Blackwoods wanted war. They were about to learn what war in the mountains really meant. The first man to reach the cabin's porch never saw the rope trap. His foot caught it, yanked tight, and suddenly he was swinging upside down, yelling in surprise and fear. Before anyone could react, Sarah's rifle cracked from somewhere in the trees. The torch he'd been carrying fell, and the man dropped with it, a red hole in his chest. "They're armed," someone shouted. "Take cover!" But there was nowhere to take cover. Jedediah's rifle spoke, and another man went down. The hired guns fired wildly into the trees, hitting nothing. Another trap triggered, and two men fell screaming into the hidden sinkhole Sarah had shown Ezra on her maps. "Into the woods," Marcus shouted. "Flush them out." The hired men hesitated, looking at the dark forest that suddenly seemed full of death. In that moment of hesitation, everything changed. The Blackwoods had come, expecting to fight farmers. Instead, they'd walked into an ambush set by a war veteran and his children, people who'd been preparing for this fight for years. And Ezra, watching from his blind, realized something important. The Blackwoods could be beaten. It would cost everything. It would require sacrifice and pain and a willingness to fight in ways civilized people didn't talk about. But they could be beaten. And that changed everything.